All right. Hey everybody, welcome to One Life. My name is Lane. So great to have all of you at all of our campuses and those of you who are watching online. So great to have everybody with us today. We're continuing in a series about Moses. And as we jump into this today, we're going to talk about something that all of us have in common, something that all of us have experienced. And speaking of things that all of us have experienced, how many of you over the last few months found yourself saying, do we live in a rainforest here in Knoxville? Anybody there? Anybody with me? I mean, it rained every single day for about 17 years is what it felt like. And it just kind of stopped. We got a brief pause. The sun was shining for a few days. How many of you like that? Like that? Okay, that's good. All right, now we're back. Okay, we'll see if this stays. But the rain actually affected a lot of us, and maybe it affected you, maybe it affected you. I'll tell you how it affected me. Just to give some context, I moved to Knoxville about 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago now, I guess, and lived in the D.C. area before that, and my wife and I lived there. I lived there for about 10 years. She grew up there. Cost of living is very high in D.C. I mean, we weren't actually in D.C. We were about 20 miles outside of D.C. Doesn't matter. It's still crazy expensive. And so all we could ever afford was, we had apartments, and then the last 3 years we lived there, we had a townhome. And it was a small townhome. You know, it was like, you know, we shared all these walls and a little tiny yard, but it was ours, okay? And we were very proud of it. So when we moved to Knoxville, I actually moved to Knoxville to work here at One Life, to serve on staff here at One Life. And when we did that, we started looking around going, oh my gosh, we can have what's called a single family home. Some of you may know what this is. And so we started looking around. We found this amazing house. How many of you have ever been looking for something and you found exactly, whether it was car, a house, a meal, you found exactly what you wanted? Anybody there? Okay, that's what it was like for us. We went there and we thought, this is it. And for the first probably, and you know what, if you saw this house, you'd probably be like, okay, it looks like any other house out there. But to me, you got to understand, to me, it was like a miracle. It was heaven. It was a dream come true. And for the first 6 months that we lived there, we just pinched ourselves every day because we thought, how could we be so lucky to live in this house? Well, about a few weeks ago when all the rain hit Powell, because my house is in Powell, my wife was out of town. She was actually in D.C. seeing her family with the kids. I was in Nashville. I came home that Saturday, the big Saturday that it just rained out. We actually had to cancel church the next day because the flooding was so bad. And I pull up to my house, and I hit the garage door, and I'm kind of holding my breath because I know it's probably going to be bad. And the garage door opens, and all this water just gushes out. Oh, and I thought, no, this can't be. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe it's just in the garage. You know, the garage has a concrete floor, no big deal. And so I walk over and I open the door to what is our basement / first level. It's a finished basement. It's beautiful. Whoever had the house before us, they did an amazing job making it look awesome. Great floors, great walls, great stuff. I open the door and water comes out of the basement. It was only an inch, but it might as well have been 7 feet because it was awful. And we had to spend all this money, a couple $1,000s, having our basement, cleaned out, and then had all these companies out to tell us how much it was going to cost to do a permanent fix. And in that moment, and for the next few weeks, I started to complain almost constantly about the flood that had happened and about my house. And I found myself even kind of thinking, why did we move to this house? Why not some other house? The houses in my neighborhood are about 9 or 10 years old, and mine was the only one that flooded. So it's kind of like, what did I do to offend the universe or whatever, that my house would be the only one that flooded? And so you would have thought that I was being tortured daily if you talked to me back in those days, because I would have said, 2 months ago, you would have said, hey, how's it going? I would have said, my house flooded. I don't know how you're doing, but my house flooded. And so how many of you have ever been there? Like something that used to be just amazing, and you looked at it and you thought this was great. Like maybe in your house, maybe it's the same thing. How many of you have ever been to someone's house where you walk in and you go, hey, this is pretty nice? And maybe you say, hey, nice house, I really like it. And they say, well, we didn't paint this wall, and I don't like that color, and little Johnny screwed up the floor, and and you're going, okay, it's a decent house, you can at least appreciate that, right? Or maybe you've had someone make you a meal. How many of you ever had this happen? Someone makes you a meal, you're eating it, maybe you're over their house for dinner, and you're just trying to be polite, so you say, hey, you know what, it's great, maybe it really is great. You say, this food tastes amazing. And they look at you and they say, oh, I burnt the bread, and I overcooked the meat, and that's probably going to kill you, so just enjoy it. And you're going, it's fine. But we all share this tendency. It's not just me. It's not just the people you know. It's probably you. In fact, how many of you have ever had one bad experience at a restaurant and swore it off for life? Anybody been there? Okay, I'll tell you my story. Everybody has a story. There's a service these days. It's pretty cool. It's pretty neat. You can get your phone out. You have an app. You can just put an order in to any restaurant. Someone will go pick it up and bring it to your house. It's an amazing time that we live. And I like to use these apps all the time. And there was one that I won't name the company. It may or may not rhyme with Boorbash, but I ordered food on it, and it took forever because they messed it up. And so I decided right then and there that was an injustice that will not stand. I shall never, ever use that company again. But you've been there, right? You've been to that restaurant that maybe you've had great experience after great experience, and then one bad experience, and you're just like, forget it. I see this tendency to complain about things that are actually pretty good in my kids. Like I can sit my kids, and I have 3 kids. They're 4, 3, and 1 right now. It always changes, but right now it's 4, 3, and 1. And I can sit them down and I can give them a cookie, and I'm thinking, hey, I'm dad of the year, right? I'm giving them a cookie. And I can literally put the cookie in front of them, and immediately one of them, 1 out of 3 in every case, will just burst into tears. Does anybody know why? Do you know why? Because it's not 2 cookies, right? It's only 1. I'm a terrible father, right? But we have this tendency, like maybe you're in school, you're in high school, you're in middle school, and you get a grade and it's a B, right? And the person next to you would kill for a B, right? Because they're like D for diploma kind of deal, and you're like, you get the B and all you can do is complain, right? Because, it should have been an A, or maybe you got the A minus and it should have been an A plus. Or maybe you post something on Instagram and you only get a few likes, maybe 5, maybe 5,000, but you wanted, 5 million or whatever you're used to getting. And now what used to be amazing to you, you just crumble inside. Why does no one care about my meaningless post on Instagram, right? And so the thing is, we all have a tendency to do this. And here's the thing that we need to understand, is that every single one of us are complainers, aren't we? Like, by show of hands, how many of you have complained about something in the last week? All of our campuses, show of hands. Okay, all right, great. So every single one of us, we complain, and here's what we're going to find out, is that actually complaining, even though it's natural, and even though it's something that you do, something that I do, something that all of us participate in, just because it's natural, just because it's normal, doesn't mean it's not without consequence. It doesn't mean that we can do it and have no effect on us whatsoever. In fact, what I want you to see this morning, we're going to kind of unpack this idea, is this idea right here, that complaining is an everyday mistake that causes me to miss everyday miracles. Complaining is an everyday mistake that causes me to miss everyday miracles. Now you might say, what's an everyday miracle? What do I mean by that? Well, I think the best explanation of this actually comes from a comedian who has this bit about how everything is amazing and no one's happy. And here's what he says. You've heard this story before. He talks about how when people talk about their experience flying, how many of you have flown in the last 5 years on a plane? Anybody? Okay. How many of you have ever heard a story of someone who's flown on a plane and it was not good? Okay, show of hands, right? Okay. Everybody's hands go up. You've all heard the same story, right? And he talks about how it's like, you would think that they were telling a story of how they were captured as a prisoner of war, right? And they were mercilessly tortured and beaten and then sent back to the country. It's like we pulled out of the gate and we sat there for 45 minutes. Yes, right? 45 horrible minutes, right? And you're just thinking, okay, whatever, right? You sat in a chair in the sky, right? You participated in the miracle of flight the entire time. He says, you should just be sitting there going, wow, right? But instead, an everyday miracle that we just take for granted, that we can get in a chair that eventually gets us in a tube 6,000 feet in the sky, or however many miles in the sky it is, 6 miles in the sky, 30,000 feet, and then we get to our destination, right? Going from one side of the country to the other used to take 6 months, and it would be a totally different group of people by the time you got there. Now it takes 6 hours, right? That's an everyday miracle, right, that we miss out on. The fact that I have a basement, the fact that I have a house with food and shelter over me, that's an everyday miracle. That's not something that everybody gets to have in this world. The fact that you have a school that you go to and you got the B that you didn't want, it's just a pretty amazing miracle that you're getting an education. The fact that we have a house that we can complain about, that we have meals that we make, the fact that my kids can sit at a table and have a cookie any time that we allow them to have a cookie, right? It's pretty amazing miracle. And these are the things that kind of happen all around us. But the problem is that when we complain, it's an everyday mistake. It's a mistake that we just kind of make. It's routine, it's mundane, it happens all the time, but it causes us to miss out on the everyday miracles, and we're going to see why. Because you complain, I complain, so what is the reason that it causes us to miss out on these everyday miracles? And we're gonna see why. And to do that, we're gonna be in Exodus 16. If you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn to Exodus 16. This is where we pick up in the story. Now, I wanna just mention that last week we saw that God parted the Red Sea. If you missed that sermon, go back and check it out. Pastor Rodney's sermon on that just amazing story of God's provision, that he parted a sea so they could walk through it, and then their enemies were destroyed behind them, and they were able to continue on towards the promised land. That's an incredible thing. That just happened. The timeline is 1 month ago, okay? 1 month ago, God did this incredible miracle, and then here they are. They're in the wilderness. Maybe you feel like you're in the wilderness. Maybe you can relate. But here they are, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine, could we see ourselves in their story? Think about that. As we walk through this, think about this like a mirror, and I want to ask you, could you and do you see yourself in them? Is there any place where you could relate to them? And so here's where we pick up in the story. There too, Exodus 16:2, there too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. The whole community. So again, 1 month after God does something incredible, they're already complaining. And I think it's interesting that it's the whole community, and we'll get to that in a second. It's also, just to make a note of this, it's about Moses and Aaron. It's about their leaders. They're not complaining about each other. They're complaining about the leaders. And this is just the reality of life. It's not popular to be in leadership. In fact, when I was 9 years old, I played Little League Baseball, and it was our coach, he was not a good coach. This is what I heard from the parents, okay? The parents would get together and they would talk, and they would just bash the coach. And I would think to myself as a 9-year-old, like, these people are so angry with our coach that they probably would kill him. I mean, if they could, or if no one was looking, they'd probably take his life because we're 9, it's machine pitch Little League Baseball, and we're losing. How dare him, right? And so, but he was in leadership, and I just remember thinking, who would ever want to be a coach, right? Who would ever want to lead the people through Israel? And this is kind of where we find Moses and Aaron. But there too, the whole community. So everybody is complaining. Everybody is upset. And my question for you at this point is just for us to think about, what in the world could they possibly have to complain about? I mean, think about this. What in the world? What are they complaining about? It's been 1 month since God delivered them in this amazing way. 1 month since they almost vanished off the face of the planet in a horrific, brutal, violent death at the hands of their enemies. And now, the entire group is upset. The entire group is complaining. And so what could they have to complain about? And I think the same question could be asked of us. What could we have to complain about? I don't know, but here's what I do know. What this tells me is this, that complaining is an everyday mistake that everybody makes. Complaining is an everyday mistake that everybody makes. It's something that's so universal to the human experience. In fact, I did some research this week about complaining and how it actually rewires the human brain to cause you to want to complain more and for complaining to become more of a default position and more natural. And so it can actually be an addictive behavior that has to be broken for you to overcome it. Isn't that amazing? I just love when we see that science and the Bible actually speak the same language, that science confirms what we see taught throughout God's history, throughout the world, throughout the scriptures. I think that's an amazing thing. So complaining is an everyday mistake that everybody makes. Every single one of us have the tendency to do this. And you've seen this in your work. Like for example, like maybe have you ever been at work and you've seen somebody complaining? and you thought, I wonder what they're, like two people are kind of talking, and you can kind of understand, you can kind of see that they agree about something that both of them don't like. East Campus, West Campus, maybe you've seen this where you see two people and they're together, and so you go and you jump in and you say, I wonder what could be happening. And before you know it, there's 5 or 6 of you, and you're all kind of jumped in and complaining. And before you know it, it's like something that you didn't know about 10 minutes ago, now you're incensed. It's like, we got to do something about this, right? Because complaining can be contagious. Complaining is something that is not just contagious, but it's addictive, and we can get sucked into it. And isn't it easy? Isn't it easy for us to think that just because everybody's complaining about it, that it's right? Isn't that an easy thing for us to do? I know it is for me. Like when I see someone complaining, it's easy for me to jump in and say, yeah, this is not okay. We got to fix this, right? It's natural and it's normal. And it's something that it's an everyday mistake that every single one of us make. Every single one of us make. But here's the problem with it, because we can't get sucked into the lie that just because everybody's complaining that it's right, that we should jump into it. Because it still can cause us to miss everyday miracles. How? How does complaining cause us to miss everyday miracles? Well, the primary reason is this. Because when you're complaining, what are you focused on? Think about that. When you complain, where's your focus? Where's your mind when you complain? It's on the problem, right? It's on the thing. It's on the thing that is not right, that's not okay, right? You're focused on that. And when you're focused on that, what can you not see? You can't see what God's doing. You can only focus on one thing at a time, right? People think they can multitask. You really can't. It's not possible. And in this case, when you are focused on the problem, you miss all these everyday miracles that God is doing. So this is an everyday mistake that everybody makes. So just from the outset, here's what we can see. This is something that's a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for all of us to overcome this because it comes so natural to the human experience. Let's continue on and see what happens from here. So we continue in the story. And they say this in Exodus 16:3. If only. Everybody say, if only. If only. They're kind of in this desperate place. We'll see this in a second. If only the Lord had killed us when we were back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. So the first thing that we see that happens here is they kind of jump into this melodramatic, if only the Lord had killed us, right? I saw just kind of firsthand how ridiculous this can be. I told you my basement flooded, and so when this happened, we're talking about it, my wife and I. I'm calling different companies, having them out, getting their quotes. All the numbers are adding up. I'm very frustrated. So one day, and I don't even know that my 4-year-old Olive is paying attention to any of this. I don't know that she's hearing it. And so I get off the phone one day, and I'm sitting there, and Olive is over on the couch. I hang up, and she walks over, and she goes, "Oh no, not water on the floor, not water. What are we ever going to do?" And then she thrust herself onto the couch and then just busted up laughing at me. And I realized if you knew my daughter, you would just know that she's prone to like this kind of thing. But right there in that moment, it was like this mirror was right in front of me. Like I look pretty ridiculous, right? And sometimes it takes a 4-year-old to point that out. And so they're in that same place. Right? They're like, yeah, if only the Lord had killed us, right? If only we could have just died a slow and agonizing death as slaves at the hands of the Egyptians. That would have been far better than where we are now. And it's just an inaccurate view of reality. And then they go a step further, and this let's go back. They go a step further where they say, we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread that we wanted. Think about this. It's like you were putting together bricks with straw and mud, right? You were not sitting, they just have this view of we sat around, and when we would become hungry, we would reach for the meat from the pot and we would bring it to our mouths, and then we would reach for the bread and we'd bring it to our mouths, and when we were full, we would fall into a deep slumber, and then we would awaken and do it again. No, that's actually not the reality, right? But a lot of times when we complain, we have a selective memory, don't we? East Campus, West Campus, don't we have a selective memory when we complain, when we look back on the future? Don't we look back and kind of have sometimes a rosy picture of the past and a glim picture of the future? In fact, where they go next is where what they think is happening in this next part. They say, but now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death, right? Aaron and Moses, the people who delivered them, the people who fought for them, the people who went to Pharaoh over and over and said, let my people go. They brought you into the wilderness to starve you to death, right? Kind of is pretty ridiculous, right? And what this tells me is this right here. This right here. Complaining is more about anticipated pain than experienced pain. Complaining is more about anticipated pain than experienced pain. I'll tell you how this kind of plays out in real life, because this is true again and again and again. I have a friend who is a huge Oklahoma City Thunder fan. Anybody love the Thunder? We have any? Okay, no? East Campus, West Campus, anybody? If there was a shout out at all, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Okay, because I'm from Oklahoma City originally. That's where I lived until I was 22. And so I went back. We were there in November for a wedding. And so my friend's like, man, I got these Thunder tickets. Let's go to the game. So the whole way to the game, we're playing, I think they, us, whatever, however it works. I'm not a sports guy, but the Thunder was the team that I was identifying with that day. And he's a hardcore fan. So we're playing the Dallas Mavericks. So the whole time I'm like, hey, so who are we playing? He's like, well, we're going to play the Dallas Mavericks. I'm like, oh, cool. Are we going to do well? You know, how's it going to go? And he says, well, no, we're going to lose. And here's why. Because we've lost significant key players. We haven't been playing well. It's going to be a terrible game. Just letting you know, I'm going to be mad. I'm going to be upset. When all this is over, let's just make the most of it. So I'm sitting there, and for those of you who are into sports, you need to understand something about the 10% of us who aren't, okay? We don't know how to handle ourselves around you when you get upset, because what it can feel like is the same feeling of being at a funeral, okay? Where, it's not appropriate to laugh. You don't want to be cutting up with your friends. You just kind of want to keep your head straight and down and just be respectful. That's how it feels, because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. And so we sit there, and the whole time, we get through the first part of the match and whatever, however it works, and they start to win. And so it was just incredible. And I looked at him and I said, hey, I'm looking at the scoreboard. Are we going to win? And he says, no, it's not going to happen. Okay, don't get your hopes up. I've been happy too many times about this. And so sure enough, we get through the whole game. And Thunder just brutalizes them. I mean, we just win. Thunderstruck comes on by AC/DC, and, confetti falls from the ceiling. And, I mean, everybody's just having a great time. And he was proven wrong, right? And all of that pain, all that complaining could have been avoided, because all of it was just anticipated pain. None of it was experienced. And this is kind of how all of us are, man. Like, maybe you've been around that person who won't try any food, just will not just make themselves try a different kind of food than they've ever had before, because they're afraid that, what if I don't like it? What if it, makes me sick? What if it kills me? Whatever the case. And so they just won't try it. And I'm not just talking about your kids. I know adults like this, right? Like, most of us know someone like this, or maybe this is you. Maybe you've convinced yourself kind of daily that you dread your job. You convinced yourself that you have a miserable job. So every day the prospect of going to work is just miserable, and you just kind of die inside every day thinking, I've got to go in, because you've already anticipated it's going to be a miserable, horrible day. But the reality is, most of that is just anticipated, not experienced. And we lose so much of the everyday miracles around us. We lose so much of what God is doing in and around our lives and in the lives of the people around us, because we're so focused, even on things that hadn't even happened yet, things that aren't even reality. Have you ever been there? Has it ever happened to you? East Campus, West Campus, have you been there where you've said, gosh, I complained, I worried, I fretted over something that eventually didn't even happen the way I thought it was going to? I've been there. Maybe you have. Let's see where these people go, because we're learning from them, and I want us to continue to look at where they are. And before we get to that, I want to ask this question, because I feel like this is an important question for us to consider. Because if you think about the people in Israel, think about Moses and his people. 1 month prior to this, 1 month prior, God did this unbelievable thing. parted the Red Sea, and they've already forgotten. And so I want to ask you, what is the thing that God has done in your life? Maybe 1 month ago, maybe 1 week ago, maybe 1 year ago. What is the thing that God has done in your life, even in the last decade, that in the moment, you couldn't believe it? It was just a miracle. It was an answer to prayer. It was everything you ever wanted. It solved your problem. It saved the day, and you've already forgotten. What is that thing? Because for these people, it only took 1 month. Now all of a sudden, they're already to a point where they're just anticipating that God's not going to be faithful to us. God's not going to be there for us. Even though he has been, he's not going to be there for us now. And the thing that we're going to see that I think is so amazing is that at this point, they've complained about Moses and Aaron and their circumstances, but they don't really understand who or what they're actually complaining about. So let's take a look. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day the people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day." So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "By evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt." He's reminding them, hey, God has done something for us and he'll continue to do something for us. "In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord because he has heard your complaints, which are against him, not against us." What have we done that you should complain about us? So at this point, Moses and Aaron are saying, hey, listen, you need to understand who you're complaining against. He goes on. Then Moses added, "The Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning." Does this sound familiar? You recognize this from the first part of the story where they looked back and they said, we had meat and we had bread as slaves. And he says, look, fine, God's going to provide that for you too. "For he has heard all your complaints against" who? Say it aloud. 1, 2, 3. Him. "What have we done?" Yes, he repeats himself. "Your complaints are against the Lord, not against us." And what this tells me is this right here. When I complain about my circumstances, I'm actually complaining about God. And I'll just be honest, this is a sobering thing for me to consider. Because it's easy to complain about our circumstances, about a flooded basement, and remove that, separate that from it being about God. But if you look at all of life, it makes sense. Like, for example, if I come home from work and my wife has been home all day with wrestling 3 kids, and I look around and I see that the bed's not made, and there's clothes on the couch, and there's food in the sink, and it hasn't been put away, dishes in the sink, and I just kind of make this snap, gosh, this place is a mess. Am I talking about the house, or am I talking about my wife? Well, I'll just be honest with you. She takes it like I'm talking about her. It's not her responsibility to clean the house. That's something that we share, but it's still something that she feels very personally. Like maybe, for example, like maybe you have a wife or a husband or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and you've been together for a long time, and you say something like this: "My life is so boring. My life is just so boring." What is that person going to think, right? They're going to think, well, I mean, maybe I'm the one who's making you bored, right? It can come across like an offensive thing. And I think where this is so vivid is if you're a parent and somebody talks about your kids, I mean, it's like fighting time, or whatever. Like those are fighting words, because when you talk about someone's kids, who are you talking about? Them, right? Like you say something about my girls, it's a reflection on me, and I take it personally because I want to protect my kids, and I also, I feel that I'm their father. They're a part of me. They're part of who I am as a family and as a person. And so when we complain about God's people, don't you think that God would feel that as a father? When we complain about the things that God has given us, don't you think God would feel that as the provider? When we complain about the fact that God allows us to have things happen in our lives, wouldn't you think that God would feel those complaints in the same way that we do? And here's the thing that I think is pretty amazing, is that when we, just like a child who looks at their parents and says, you only gave me one cookie, we look at God sometimes and we say, not good enough. I should have bought the next house. I should have had the other car. I should have done the other thing, and you didn't give me what I wanted. And this is why I think James, the brother of Jesus who wrote the book of James, reminds us so powerfully that every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father, it says. So everything we have, everything that you have, in fact, Jesus said, even the birds of the field have their needs provided for. How much more does your Father, your heavenly Father, love you and provide for your needs? And so here's the tendency is for us to say, yeah, you're right. I feel bad. I've been complaining about God. And you might think that at this point, like God would say, okay, I'm striking these people down, right? Because they've been complaining about me. But that's not what we see. And I think it's a pretty amazing thing. Let's continue. Then Moses said to Aaron, announce this to the entire community of Israel. Present yourselves before the Lord, for he has heard your complaining. He says this again. Then the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the Israelites' complaint. God hears us. And it's not like he gets tired of hearing it and he gets mad at us. But understand, East Campus, West Campus, when you complain, when I complain, just like we would hear when our kids complain, God hears and he responds. That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp. The next morning, the area around the camp was wet with dew. We're seeing God's provision come to light. There's a little bit more explanation. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. This, by the way, is manna. If you've ever heard of manna from heaven, that's where that comes from. If we were to read further in the chapter, they would explain. There's a whole lot there that you can read about how God provided just enough, just in time. Manna was basically bread. It was like a flaky, tasty bread that they got every day. And every family got just as much as they needed, no more, no less. And then even on the sixth day, God provided 2 helpings of it so they could have it so they wouldn't have to do it on the Sabbath day. It's a pretty amazing thing. God thought through every angle to make sure that the people had meat in the quail and bread every single morning, just in time, just enough. And I think if we look around to see these everyday miracles, that's the same way God provides for us. Just what we need, just in the moment. Verse 15, and Moses told them, it is the food the Lord has given you to eat. So here we see that they are not going to starve to death in the wilderness. They were not brought there to die. God has actually provided yet again. And so here's the amazing thing. This is just God's mercy coming through. Even when I complain, because you complain, right? And so do I. All of us complain. Even when I complain, God's 1, 2, 3, let's say it together at all campuses, mercy. God's mercy. This is a theme, by the way, that we see over and over and over in the story of these people and Moses taking the Israelites out of the wilderness and into the promised land, that again and again and again, they're the recipients of God's mercy. That God's mercy still provides miracles. I love this because I think it's just an amazing thing to consider, because here's a question that I would ask you, that I think we should all consider. If you were God in this moment, and 1 month ago, you delivered these people, you parted the sea, you defeated their enemies, you sustained them, and then 1 month later they're complaining about you, what would you have done, right? What would you have done? What would I have done? I think I probably would have said, okay, fine, I'm done with you. That's enough. But here we see that God's mercy still provides miracles, not just here with the quail and the manna from heaven, but the next chapter you can read about how they were thirsty yet again, they were complaining yet again, and God didn't strike them down. God actually made water gush from a rock to provide water for the whole community. And so it's a pretty amazing thing to consider. Now, here's the thing. At this point, that's kind of where we stop in the story. And at this point in the message, wouldn't you expect me to just say, okay, everybody, you feel bad about complaining, don't you? Does everybody feel bad? Great. East Campus, West Campus, show of hands. Everybody feel bad? Great. All of us complain. We're terrible people. So listen, let's close in prayer. stop complaining, and make sure to stop by Next Steps on the way out, right? That would kind of probably be the expected response, right? But that's not the point. In fact, stopping complaining is not the point. It falls so much short, falls so short of where God expects us, what God's calling us to. Not just don't complain, but something way better. And I'll explain it right here as we wrap up. It's this concept. Hebrews 12:2. The author of Hebrews says, fixing our eyes on what? 1, 2, 3, Jesus. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. The author of Hebrews is talking about the Christian life as a race and how things can trip us up from being able to run with endurance, the weight we have on us, the sin that we have on us. He says just like a runner will get rid of all that to run with endurance, then strip all that away and focus on Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Not to the right or to the left, not on the everyday complaint, not on what's going wrong, but focus on Jesus. Why? Because he is the author, the one who initiated faith, and the perfecter of faith. What is faith? Faith is trust. Faith is saying, I'm not going to complain because I know where the future goes. I'm not going to complain about anticipated pain that I haven't experienced yet because I know that God holds the future. That's faith. And so the only way that we can bolster and make that faith greater than our fear that causes us to complain is when we put our focus on Jesus. And so what I want to do is I want to give you three things. 3 things that we can do. 3 things that we can walk out of here with that are tangible things. The first thing is to focus on Jesus, right? Like if focusing on what's going wrong causes us to miss everyday miracles, then let's focus on Jesus. But some of you might be saying, okay, great. How, right? How do we do that? Well, the way we focus on Jesus is, here's one thing you can do. Thank God for what you have. In fact, here's a great exercise that you could do this week, and I'll do it too. Pray for a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Just set a time. And in your prayer, ask God for nothing. Only thank him for what he's done in your life. Just do that. And what you'll find is that your focus will go away from the everyday complaints and start to focus on everyday miracles. Because when you've got 5 minutes and all you can do is thank God for your family, thank God for your kids, thank God for the school that you go to, thank God for the team that you get to start on, thank God for whatever the case, you start to realize, oh my gosh, look at what God is doing all around me. What do I have to complain about? And then finally, tell someone about what God has done for you. Tell someone. Because here's what we love more than anything, is when God does something incredible in your life, you experience Jesus in some way, and then you share that story. Because here's what can happen. You tell someone, hey, I've been there. That used to really get me down too, and here's what God did. That's a powerful thing. Because we put all this together. Complaining is an everyday mistake. It's so common. It's so common that every one of us have a natural tendency to make it. But it causes me to miss everyday miracles because my focus is not on what God is doing. My focus is on what's going wrong and the complaint itself. And so here's what I want for us. I want us to be a place, as we wrap up, I want us to be a place where people see a joy in us that they don't see in most people. Like how are, your top 5 card that you've turned in or that you're going to turn in today, how do you expect to compel 5 people to come experience Jesus with you at church when all they see is misery in you? Think about that. Like if you're around people, and this is for me just as much as it is for anybody, if all they hear is what's wrong, here's complaint, and then you say, oh, by the way, come to church with me because there you can live like I do and be miserable as well, right? Nobody wants that. So what if we kind of flipped that script? What if we said, hey, I'm going to focus on Jesus, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's not like I'm just going to stop complaining, because again, that's not the point. The point is Jesus. Let him take care of the details. If our focus is on him, we're thanking him for what he's done, we're telling other people about it, all of a sudden, that whole paradigm gets shifted. And then we as a church at all 3 of our campuses, and everybody who calls One Life Church their home can begin to see that, man, people are drawn to you. People are drawn to you because what you have, East Campus, West Campus, is decidedly different than what they've experienced. But that can only happen if we're focused not on the complaint, but on the miracle worker who's doing things in and around us all the time. And so my hope, my prayer for you, for me, is that we would just be a people who continually strive, not to stop complaining, but to have our focus be on Jesus. And let him change our hearts and let other people see that so that we can begin to see people experience Jesus and give Jesus their best and not do life alone and then multiply like Jesus does. Why? Because they were drawn to something that was different. They were drawn here to discover Jesus and how their one life can make a difference because they saw your one life was different. They saw your one life wasn't the same, and it was because of where your focus was. Wouldn't that be amazing? I want that for you, and I want that for us. And that's what we're going to ask God to do right now. Would you pray with me? God, I just want to ask that there would be just small miracles done in here that even though so many of us, myself included, find it very natural to complain, I pray that you would help us to do something that's very unnatural, and that is to change our focus, to shift our thoughts towards you, and to be people who aren't just hyper-focused on what's wrong, but on the one who makes everything right. And God, I pray for those who are in here who would say that maybe the reason why they're not focused on you, the reason why they're not seeing miracles is they don't know you. They haven't put their faith in you, Jesus. They haven't decided that they no longer want control of their own life, but rather they want you to take over. So God, for that person, I pray that they would, even right now, just as we sit here, would say, I'm tired of doing this by myself. All this does is produce just a spirit of complaint in me. I just see what's wrong. And I want to focus on Jesus. But to do that, I know that I have to know him. God, I pray that person could, right here in this moment, just say, Jesus, I give my life to you. I give you control. Make me a new person. Forgive me of my sins. Give me a new life. Help my one life make a difference because you're now in it and at the center of it. And God, I pray that this week, as we thank you for what you've done and as we walk in step with what you're doing and we begin to see it, I pray that you would just wow us this week, that we would see with different lens, with different perspective than ever before. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you stand? We're going to sing a song called The King of My Heart. And it's going to refocus us to see Jesus and what he's done for us. So let's sing together.